So my wife and I were, well, not me and my wife, but my wife and I were actually, my wife was flying down and to Atlanta, and there was something called Dragon Con. Is that something that you're familiar with?
I am. I've not been to Dragon Con, but I've definitely been to Gen Con and a lot of local conventions for sure.
Yeah. So she was on the plane and everyone was going to Dragon Con. It was just her and my daughter on the plane. And but she said it was quite a cast of characters. And with what you got going on, Todd and I were just talking before we hit record that Todd is into like all sorts of stuff. So that's why we're talking about Dragon Con. But what is how did you get into community building exactly? And like it's really hard to do. It's not as easy as some people make it look out to be. So like how did you stumble across wanting to do something that's pretty tough?
Uh, there's some complication to that, and I'm not going to go too deep into the weeds with this. But what I will say is, um, my professional career really started when I left grad school in the night and decided that I wanted to enter the more of the corporate world. Took a job as a software trainer, ended up becoming a recruiter for about the first 15 years of my career. And so I worked in the tech space in recruiting, and I started running into in the early 2000s a lot of conversations about social media, around collaboration platforms, ways for people to start working together. This was happening almost simultaneous to me getting involved with some online multiplayer role-playing style games, and sort of seeing how the gaming world interacted and collaborated, using discussion forums and wikis and live chat like IRC, things like that. And then comparing that to the business world that was just starting to embrace this idea of online spaces for people to meet and connect in meaningful ways. And I think that's when I caught the bug around this whole idea of community building. And I was someone who, as a recruiter, loved the idea of like connecting someone up with their interests so that they were working for a company where they could be creative and have, a good professional life. And seeing this new group of tools come up, I saw the business applications, really around that and the challenges, and ended up doing like user groups. Like I helped put together an agile user group in the Milwaukee area, grew to like 600 people, pretty quickly. I started doing these events around the economic downturn in 2008, 2009, called Milwaukee Job Camp, to try to help people who were looking for work. And so all of that just started moving me in the direction of looking at how people come together in technology mediated spaces online, whether it's, chat rooms, social media platforms, private, collaboration spaces. And that turned into a career pivot for me. I left recruiting, made the switch into online communities with a company called Seven Summits back around 2013, and I never looked back. This has become my life's work, my passion, things that I like to talk about to anyone who cares to listen to the story.
In the early 2000s, meeting someone online was weird. Now it's like, oh, I only want to meet people if I do my homework and have a conversation with them prior to meeting them. But from what I've been seeing with AI taking the main stage the last couple years, even though AI has been in society for at least 50 years minimum, to me, it almost seems like we're going too far to the technology side and we're losing almost that community of like, hey, every Saturday at 10, I'm going to be at the basketball court and 20 other people are going to be at the basketball court. And you don't even have to text nobody. You don't have to email anyone. You don't have to tweet them. It's just like, hey, if I show up here, I know people are going to be able to do an activity that I enjoy. How have you been handling the new AI world?
Well, I mean, AI is wondrous. It's enabled us with all kinds of very interesting tools and possibilities. I use it just about every day in my work to assimilate information, to help me organize my thinking, as kind of a personal assistant or someone to bounce things off of, as I am thinking through, what my next social media post is going to be or how I'm going to structure a blog. Where it's not good is human to human connection. And there's there's uh, an old classic Rush song, "The Spirit of Music." Um, and there's a lyric that always keeps coming to mind for me. All this machinery making modern music can still be open-hearted. I apply the same thing to community building. Like we have this technology, but the technology needs to fade to the background, to really enable people to connect meaningfully, person to person. And that can happen in tech mediated spaces. I've seen many communities where people, connect despite technological limitations. And I think people will continue to connect despite AI enablement of those spaces. It's just the pendulum swings, one way or the other. AI is going to be really good at helping community builders help their members get at information they want to get at really quickly, or it can act as a great concierge or a chat buddy, but it's not good at greeting people warmly and humanly as they come into an online space. It's not good at helping people to understand the nuances of where Josh's interests coincide with Todd's interests, or around a topic. It only understands things in a very rote, black and white sort of way. Humans are in the gray. We live in the gray, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's always a balancing act of either not politics, but politics is left to right. Technology could be left to right, and it's just about you're never really completely balanced, but it's just about finding that balance. And when you first got into the space in the early 2000s, obviously most people weren't using technology. There's a famous interview of Jeff Bezos of when he was raising money for Amazon, because a lot of people don't realize the stock price literally went down, I believe, like over 90% at one point. And he literally was saying, like, hey, this is Amazon.com. This is what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. And then the people with the money would just be like, what's the internet?
Right.
Like, like if you were out in a coffee shop and was like, hey, Todd, what's the internet? You would just look at them like they're a psychopath now. But
Right,
that's how it
right.
was when you first started, just to like paint a picture of how things have adapted in a very short period of time.
Exactly. It's hard for younger people to conceive of a time when there wasn't internet, when there weren't social media platforms, for interaction, and it wasn't a normal thing for someone to say, well, I'm going to go follow you on Facebook. What kind of creep are you? That you that you're are you creeping on me online? What do you know about me? Can you see my social security number? Like, that level of paranoia used to be a much more real thing. Like, now people are sort of like, yeah, of course you're going to follow me online. I think, in the business context, it's a matter of course now. Like, if I'm having a meeting with you, we're connecting on LinkedIn. Like, that's how I continue to stay in touch with you. That's how I manage my network. That's the space in which my public persona, as a business owner, lives, and where I hope people will follow my work and what I do. That was not the case. Like, it was a weirdly innovative thing to be doing that in 2008. And now I think it's just become fully socialized. We're kind of we've gotten to that point now where it's normalcy.
Yeah, it's 1,000% normal now. It's suspect almost if someone reaches out to you and you go online and you can't find anything about them, like not
Oh,
any sort of pictures, nothing. It's like, okay, what is this person hiding?
totally. And you know what? That paranoia is a little bit justified. Like, if I get a cold email that hits my business account, and it wasn't caught by a spam filter, even if it wasn't caught by a spam filter, I'm reading it and saying, like, okay, who is this person? I'm checking them on LinkedIn, and if I'm not finding them there, they're added to spam right away. Same thing, like, people will try to connect with you by text message now. I don't respond to text messages from people that I don't know. You don't know who's on the other side of that text. So, like, there is actually even there's an etiquette to doing this a business context now that has evolved just because of all the damaging scams and fraudsters and fishers, out there that are intent upon taking advantage.
Yeah, I was sending out text messages to a bunch of people that I knew. Like these are people I know. I have their number. I didn't have to ask permission for their number. Like these people I met in real life, like had real relationships with. And I was attempting to use AI so I can send out the same message to everyone without being like in a big group chat. And it was customized. It'd be like, hey, Todd, it's Josh. Want to let you know XYZ is happening. And it was funny how people that I knew just replied, stop. Like they didn't even read it. They got a text from a number that they didn't know and they were just like, stop. And I was like,
Yeah.
I put my name there so they would know it's from me. And that goes back to like saying, hey, like we've gone too far. Like I literally, there's software you can use for websites where it'll track what someone does on your website. I'll literally see someone go on the website, they'll scroll all the way to the bottom and just like copy my business numbers and email and then hop off. Like people are just, I don't know why they're doing it. They're not going to get a hold of me in any sort of way. I'm not sure if that used to work. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I don't know. You would know better than me because when you were started, I was still a young lad.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a volume over quality mentality that happens in these spaces where it must be that at least some tiny percentage of those efforts still works. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a financial incentive to do it. And so it's led to an erosion of trust. It's something, within LinkedIn, which is the primary platform that I live and work in, on a day-to-day basis, for promoting my business, that, I'm very suspicious of anybody that wants to connect for the sake of connecting, where it used to be like, I used to be very open to that. I was a promiscuous connector, if you want to think of it that way. Like, as a recruiter, I always wanted to have a wider network because that increased my ability to search for more people and to see other people in the network, which was great. Now, not so much. Like I turned down probably as many, if not more, connection requests than I get because it's blatantly clear this person wants to sell me lead generation or custom mobile app development or something that I don't know. Like they're eager to get me off of LinkedIn onto a private WhatsApp chat for some crazy reason. No thanks. Like we've had to be a lot more careful about those
I
connections.
don't believe I've accepted any LinkedIn connection in 2 years, unless I like have met the person in real life. I just like people send it to me. I'm like, I have no idea who you are. Never heard of you. I just don't even look at it at this point.
Okay, by that
Um,
definition, I am still a promiscuous connector then, because I'll connect to somebody that looks like they've got an interesting background and they look legit,
well, we connected in an organic way. I saw your profile. I was like, hey, Todd's doing something cool. I got a podcast. You want to come on? And
Right.
it's like a real, like my intentions are very clear. Would you like
Yep.
to come on the podcast? Versus like, hey Todd, we both went to University of Kentucky. Let's connect.
Right. Right.
It's just
Yeah.
like, well, that's nice of you to say, and go go Cats. I don't know if you support the Cats or not, but at the same time, we've all seen that messaging before.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. Yeah.
So, talk to us about Clock Tower and how you're using that to build these communities using technology and at the same time not lose the beauty of a human connection.
Yeah. Uh, so Clock Tower Advisors is a company I started back in 2015 after I left my agency job at Seven Summits, and that was a company that was dedicated to community building. They really kind of helped me in my career pivot, moving out of recruiting and into this space where we helped B2B, B2C, and nonprofit, kinds of organizations to set up the software and run these online communities. So I Came in, was hired as an account leader, and then became eventually a VP in the organization, and did a lot of strategy work, with the teams, and kind of fell in love with it. And so as I felt the need to leave that role for largely personal reasons, my folks were getting older, they needed a little more time and care. I set up Clock Tower Advisors to do some business with another, uh, actually probably far better known guy than I am in the community space, Richard Millington. I'm from Feverbee, and he was based in London. I was based in the U.S. here in Wisconsin, and it was a convenient way for me to just have kind of a billing relationship, so that I could work through his organization. Um, I did that for about a year and a half working with him, and then started finding some of my own contracts and opportunities. And really, since about 2017, I've been purely, my own business development for that organization. The work that I do with Clock Tower is helping organizations plan, build, and run thriving online community spaces. And that deserves a little bit of commentary, because the question becomes, what is an online community? Um, it's a much abused term. The idea of for many people that of an online community is, oh yeah, I've got a great following on TikTok, or I have a large social media account, 10,000 followers on LinkedIn. That's not a community. That's a marketplace. That's a place that's low trust, highly transactional kind of environment. The big social media platforms I talk about as being metastasized versions of what online communities actually are. They become large marketplaces, they become broadcast media, but it's hard to build communities in those spaces, because communities require a sense of intimacy. They require some walls around people that belong in those spaces or don't belong in those spaces. They require some common purpose and common trust within them. And so the brands and the companies and the organizations that I help them to think about the people that they're trying to help, whether it's fans of a product or people going for a social cause and trying to, get this group of people with these common interests together. Um, you need to define the problems that those individuals are trying to solve, and simultaneously, you need to figure out what the organization itself needs that's going to be hosting that space. And so helping companies through that process of understanding the dual nature of those needs in these online spaces, how you create trust in those spaces, what's going to happen in those spaces, and then and only then think about, like, well, what's the technology platform I want to use to solve for that. That's that's the work that I love to do, and I primarily do it for business to business organizations that by and large are in tech space or healthcare space, as well as mid-sized to large, nonprofit kind of organizations that are cause-based. I love working for cause-based organizations because they're trying to change the world, and I admire that greatly. So so really, since the mid 2010s, that's been my life's work, is thinking about, writing about, interacting with people that are trying to create these human spaces for people to interact with each other and create beautiful new things.
I've been wanting to create some sort of community. It's just, I don't know how. And I've attempted to do things, and getting people to show up is like impossible. It's just like texting, calling, emailing. So, how does someone overcome those hurdles um, to start building a community with good intentions in mind, not just building a community because they're like, hey, like this is how I'm gonna make a bunch of money.
Right. Yeah. If your intent, if it's to monetize the community, you'll be sorely disappointed, um, in the result that you get, because that's going to telegraph through to everybody that's involved with it. The it's it's the art of being able to throw a good party for others. You know, we've all been to a party, you know, growing up, high school, college, where you've run into the desperate party host, right? Um, they're so eager to get you to come in and meet everybody, and they're showing you around and not letting you pause to stop and get a drink. They're just breathlessly, you know, showing you to the beer out back and this conversation going on over here, and you know, and I don't know if what your reaction was to those situations, but usually mine is like, how do I get out of here, you know, quickly? Um, Instead, you need to be able to cultivate that sense of being welcoming to others, keeping it casual enough. You can't hold on too tightly to those social situations. And you need to be mindful that, especially in online, you know, kinds of spaces, people are, as for reasons we were talking about earlier, a little distrustful. You know, they don't know how much they can be themselves in those spaces. So they need to understand that it's safe on a couple of different levels. At the most basic level, is the technology safe? By giving my login information or setting up a login for the space, am I going to be hit with spam? Am I going to, you know, is my private information going to be harvested for some reason? Are they going to resell my email addresses? You know, like the platform itself needs to be trustworthy. It needs to look like a contemporary web experience. Otherwise, my red flags are going to go up a little bit. It needs to be trustworthy at an organizational level. Like if you, Joshua, are forming an online community, they need to understand why you're doing it. Like, what is your purpose for bringing people together? Well, they fancy your show and they want to talk about topics, you know, that are on your show. Maybe you're going to have an after party in your Discord channel, you know, after the show, and people can come in and ask questions of the guests, things like that. And so they need to understand that you have enough transparency about what you're trying to achieve, that it's trustworthy. And then on the third level, they need to be able to trust each other. You need to believe in the benevolence of the other people that are joining that space. So you're not just inviting everybody off the street. You're not inviting that Russian hacker who wants to come in. You're not inviting you know, weird, creepy people, you know, who are going to make you feel uncomfortable in the space. These are other people who have pretty similar interests or goals, you know, with what they're doing. They're joining that space because they think they've self-selected themselves there as wanting to be involved with that. And if you can establish those levels of trust and you can make it not a desperate party, you got a shot at creating a community. And I say a shot because in as much as I can give you all the positives, all the best practices for getting a community off the ground and making it go, there's still no guarantee if you're not striking at a purpose that's close enough to the hearts of the people that you're trying to get involved.
So building the community, it's more than just like having a good idea. Like how do you implement the idea? And how do
Yeah.
you make sure you don't give up? Because it's very disheartening when you put your efforts into doing something that is important to you and you know there's a problem and people are saying all the time like, hey, let's solve this problem, like this is a problem, blah blah blah, and then no one shows up to your party. Like how do you
It's
navigate that?
brutalizing, isn't it? Right. You know, and that stuff happens, right? Like we create a webinar, nobody shows up. You do an event, you know, you get two or three people show and do anything. I would say, you know, there's two things to keep in mind. I'm a big fan of the idea of emergent design for online communities. Like a lot of people like say, oh, you know what, let's start up an online community. We're gonna spin up a Discord, or we're gonna do a Slack channel. We're gonna do a Mighty Networks or a Circle. Like the platform choices are easy. It's setting a context for success in those places that's trickier. And so David Spinks, another name from the community world, is someone who's written extensively about the idea of emergent designs in communities, emergent communities. And I think to distill it down, you know, to actionable advice for you or anyone that's thinking about community building is you really kind of need to cultivate a coffee house mentality, you know, to begin with. Like have some casual meetings with 3 or 4 people that you know are going to be interested in this topic, in this space, and then ask them to invite in, a couple of people until it becomes large enough that you've got a group that is gathering regularly. Because the criteria that I'm looking at around any kind of successful community build is you've got to you have a group of people that are gathering for a particular topic or interest on a regular basis. If they're not coming back regularly, it's hard to build that sense of belonging or camaraderie. I had what I would consider a failed community attempt, that I tried on a local level here in Wisconsin, where I live, for an entrepreneurial startup network. And I decided, oh, you know what? We've got a very popular public library here locally. I'm going to do a live meeting event on a monthly basis for entrepreneurs in the area. What I didn't count on is that entrepreneurship was kind of limping along in our county and not doing great. And so part of what was happening, and this was pre-pandemic, we had a few people who would come to the first session, and then the next month it'd be a totally different set of people who came to the session, and then the next month it would be a different set of people, or maybe one of the people would come back, to doing it. And it's so hard to build any sort of momentum around that when the cadence was obviously wrong. Like I needed to have maybe weekly meetups or weekly Zoom calls or a Slack channel, because I'd seen it done better by others later after taking my licks, and not doing well with that. So I guess my message to you would be not to get discouraged, try different things, but don't, invest deeply in the technology until you've got that social movement that's actually starting to get off the ground a little bit.
So essentially just being yourself. That's what it comes down to. And doing something that you have experienced, whether it's like overcoming something. Obviously, there's lots of 5Ks for all sorts of various causes. Everyone does a golf tournament. But figuring out what's unique to you, and of what's unique to you, and what do you enjoy spending your time doing? How many other people have experienced that? Obviously, if you're the only person that's experienced something, it's going to be a lonely community. But you got to figure out different ways where you can find common threads with someone, even if on the front it doesn't seem like it. And then you dig a little deeper. It's like, for example, you look at someone, you're like, oh, like, I have nothing in common with this person. But then you show up to a concert, you see the same person, you're like, oh, you love this artist. I love this artist. And then now you have like a common thread. And then that thread can become a lot stronger by finding that one little piece of fabric that connects you. And that's the tough part.
It can be, yeah. I mean, I think it's the same thing that people get as advice for being good networkers, right? You find the common social thread, you find the social object that is a shared interest, shared passion. I think if you start to create a community from that kernel of your personal interest, your personal passion, and you start to find at least a few others, around that. Like you don't need to have a community of 10,000 people or 50,000 people or millions of people. Maybe you get there eventually, but it starts with the first 5 or the first 15. And then you find ways to help it grow organically by just gradually adding to that. So many organizations, like this tends to be endemic to larger enterprise, kinds of companies. They have a desire to keep up with the Joneses. They'll look at their competing, organizations out there and say, well, they have an online community that's doing really well. They've got, 1 million followers with what they're doing. We need to get in on that action. We need to do that. But what they're not considering often or not thinking about is well, that place started 10 years ago. And you're not going to start at the same place where they did, and you're not going to grow to that level of success. Like community is a long-term play for organizations. I think it's absolutely essential because you get better insights and better loyalty from enabling those spaces. But if lead acquisition or getting that sales funnel to, show an immediate return on investment is your goal, you're going to be sorely disappointed in your community start.
Unless you have a ton of money to throw at something, and then maybe it could work, but it still could not work. And now you're out of time and money. And that's how a lot of people I see like attempt to like build these communities is by throwing a bunch of money at it and hoping it works out versus it seems like what you're saying is taking the slow, methodical, heartfelt approach is the way to win.
It's the way that brands humanize themselves. That's something that online communities will, if done right, help you to do at scale. What organizations that have been trying to humanize their brand, are trying to do through their marketing messaging or through live meetings or focus groups or by sponsoring events, things like that. They've got a better ability to have more intimate working relationships with their customers or their colleagues or their interested parties by having these online spaces and being open to conversations. There's always the anxiety, from particularly large organizations of what if somebody says something bad about me? Well, you have them in your house. You've got the perfect place to tell your side of the story there. That's, any public relations professional will tell you, you take control of the narrative, in those spaces. If someone's in your house and provided they're not being abusive, but they're being critical of your brand or your organization or what you're doing, that's a golden opportunity, because that person wouldn't be complaining about you unless they actually did care. And if they're a troll, it's going to become really apparent they're a troll, and then you kick their ass out. But otherwise, that person could end up being one of your biggest fans, one of your biggest supporters.
I love trolls. It tests where I'm at mentally. Because if someone leaves some sort of hateful comment and I react to it, I know I'm not in a good place. But if someone leaves a comment, I'm just like, let me flip this. How can I flip this to see if I can have a reasonable discussion through comments where someone can't hear the tone of your voice or your inflection or how you're saying something? Like, if you put an exclamation on something, someone, if they're in a bad place, they think maybe you're yelling at them versus saying like, "Hey, Todd," versus like, "Hey."
Right,
And
right.
those are the sort of things that are lost in the tech. And I remember someone left me a comment one time, and I said, "Hey, I see your point, and I'm pretty new to making videos. What would you do differently?" And you know what they said? Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Oh,
So you just know some people just want to spew hate. But I thought that was a clever way of attempting to flip it. Like, hey, I'm new. I see your viewpoint, and I agree. I agree with you. What would you do differently? Nothing. Just no response back. I'm like, all right, whatever. I attempted to flip the narrative and see if any formal constructive criticism can come from it. But there's just people out there who want to bring you down with them. And you have a choice of feeding into the depression and the darkness or just pushing it away with both hands.
it's a problem with, particularly because text is still the central metaphor for our online connections with each other. We certainly we have video like this. This is a little more selective and intentional. But because I can log onto a social media platform and I am maybe an avatar picture with a name, maybe it's my name, maybe it's not my name. I can get away with more of that stuff. I can get on and I can dump all of my emotional contagion on someone else. And that's a very unhealthy place for us to be. Like I'm hopeful that we can get to a point where the technology lets us close that social gap a little further, where it's easier to get from a text conversation to a video conversation, or we're in more virtualized 3D environments, for each other. Like I'm very interested in developments in AR and VR, Meta notwithstanding, because I think they actually set us back a few years, with what Zuckerberg was trying to do. But the idea of putting people into virtualized spaces where there is actually a sense of moving through a simulation of an architectural space, like where there are rooms and where there's proximity and a greater telegraphing of emotion and intention. Um, that's going to really do a lot for helping people feel more connected and more responsible for what they say and do around each other.
Yeah, it's tough though, just because now that social media, everyone's on it, it's definitely a lot more noisy, so it makes it harder to get the right people to see your message unless you have the money to invest to specifically target people. And even if you specifically target someone, they still may not be interested because they're going to see the sponsored or this is an ad because they have to disclose all that now and say, oh, swipe up. I'm not even going to look at it. So, if from your point of view, anyone looking to start an online community or any sort of community, what's the best place to start right now?
Best place to start is to sit down with a piece of paper in front of you or an open word processor screen and articulate what your goal is, for starting that community. Like what do you want to build? Like and who's it for?
So, I had
Why
an
would they?
idea. I had an idea for a community. Can I bounce it off you?
Yeah, go for it, man. I love it.
So it was going to be, well, I've had a lot of ideas. I haven't acted upon any of them, but one idea was to for people who grew up in divorced family, how to strengthen their relationship with money. Because typically in divorce, what do most people argue about? Who's getting the house? Who's getting this? Who's getting that? Who's how much child support are you going to get? And the child sees money as like a bad thing because it ruined their parents' relationship. And that could hinder them from making smarter investment decisions
Mhm.
in the future. That was one idea that I had.
So what I like about it is that you're targeting a very specific kind of situation, that a decently large population of people experience, and
Yeah.
you're offering you're offering a vision for how those individuals can change their mental attitude or their outlook
Mm-hmm.
towards it. And I think there's power in that, because then people are going to say, like, if you have somebody that looks at that, let's say you got a landing page for that online community, you want to join that online community, and you've described that to them, there's going to be a segment of people that read that and say, oh yeah, you know what, I've been through a divorce as a kid, been on that side of it. I've seen the pain, I've seen the suffering of that. Like, this page is describing that situation for me, and I'm nodding my head as I'm rolling down that page. And then there's a way for me to join and help me to change my attitudes towards money and making money and its value in my life, like have a healthier attitude towards those things. I'm going to click join, on that. I think that if you're making that case and you're resonating with the very real concerns that maybe they haven't even been able to express for themselves, you're going to get people to join that space. Then it becomes a question of, are you asking them to join a space where there's going to be a delivery on that promise? Just like any kind of brand, there's a brand promise involved. With a brand promise of an online community is, there's going to be stuff here that I can't get someplace else. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's either going to be events or resources or discussion. Peer support is kind of a given, within an online
So,
community space.
so step one would maybe set a goal of like, hey, I want to find two people who want to tag team this with me.
Mhm,
Now
mhm.
I have a team of three. Now we could start putting stuff together and let's see how long this team of three lasts. Does it last one meeting and then you go to the meeting, no one shows up? Do you get 3, 6, or 9 months in and everyone's still there? And then that way it's much easier to replace two people than seemed like what you were saying earlier. You're throwing these events, people are showing up, and it was just like churn and burn, like different people every time. People show up, and then they're like, "Oh, no one's here. I'm not coming back." Versus actually looking at the opportunity, and that's where most people, uh, you know, are judgy.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think of there was a group that I had some involvement with back around the time of the pandemic that ended up accumulating a pretty strong movement, and it was a monthly webinar it was based in the Milwaukee area for professionals of color to come together and to they would have a speaker, and then there'd be some open discussion, Q&A, live chat in the Zoom channel, and they grew to over 5,000 people over the course of the pandemic, and that was a sufficient reason to create an online community around that. There were various reasons why that community didn't gel into an ongoing online community, but it certainly had that potential to be that place because, for the very reason you said, they're still meeting 9 months later, 12 months later, then you got something, then you have something. I wouldn't necessarily give up. Like if you toss that event with an initial 5 people, that you think we're going to be interested in it, and they don't come back the following week, that's not a reason to stop doing it, because you probably have to keep trying it for at least a month or two to see if you're getting any kind of traction. Maybe switch it up a little bit to see if try advertising on different channels, approach different people about it, different personal invitations or ways of inviting them to that, because you're never quite sure what, beyond setting yourself up for success with sort of planning how that community is going to grow over time. There's still an alchemy to it because it's people, and you never know what's going to necessarily, spark their imagination or get them together. Sometimes it's something completely unexpected that's going to bring them together. Like a giveaway, or that it was a particular guest that you had on your show at that point, and then everybody's like, hey, you know what? Everybody's got to hit this event that Josh was doing, because then there's an online community connected with it afterwards. We get together in Discord and we exchange recipes, about our favorite daiquiris or whatever, right? That that could be the magic element, that comes in, and it's part of the fun of building these kinds of spaces, because you never quite know where the spark is going to come from, but you set the conditions for the fire.
Totally. Well, Todd, love what you're doing. Let's chat offline and see how maybe you could help me with my vision. And for anyone that wants to start building a community, go find Todd. We'll see everyone next time. Bye, everyone.